Hello everyone, and welcome to Everything is Final Fantasy. I'm Drew Kreisman.
And I'm Ira Kreisman.
And today, I want to tell you about Roguebook. But first, I do have to do one more of these. I feel like we've done a lot lately. Hey look, a lot's been going on, okay? A lot has happened in the last few months, including the birth of my son and the fall of American democracy. And so, there's sort of been a lot happening. And I promise to those of you who are waiting for the next Final Fantasy VIII episode and then for us to get into Final Fantasy IX, that is going to happen. In fact, the plan now, and hopefully we can follow through on this, is to do a few episodes over the Thanksgiving holiday when we get together, and that'll really get us back on track for all of that. But in the meantime, because it does take a lot of research and sort of getting notes together to do those kinds of things, I just didn't want there to be nothing, and I really want to try out this new methodology, if you will, for reviewing games. As fun as it might be to listen to me ramble on for 10 or 20 minutes as though I'm some sort of professional video game reviewer, I thought I would do it more the way most normal people do. And that's, I call my brother, and I say, hey, have you heard about this game? So we're going to try this out for a few things and see how it works. And like I mentioned, today's topic is Roguebook, which I know you haven't played, but we're going to take it one step backward because something I reviewed a while ago on the Patreon was Slay the Spire, which you did try at one of your more recent visits to my house. And you are a Magic the Gathering, dare I say, aficionado?
Sure, yeah, you can say that.
I just did.
You did. You can and you did. Yeah, I am a big fan of Magic the Gathering. I have been playing since 1995 when I was 14 years old. Yeah. I don't play as much anymore. I do buy and collect and build decks and keep up with the story and the new design. And I listen to Mark Rosewater's podcast and I read his blog and I read his articles. I'm not sure what that has to do with Roguebook, but I think, know what that has to do with Slay the Spire, because like you said, I played at your house, and it's card collecting and deck management and trying to figure out the strategy for defeating this meta or that.
Yeah. So, as I said, I really enjoyed Slay the Spire, though I did feel like I ran into too much bad luck too often. And there were a few things that I would really like to have seen changed about it. And then a few people out there on the interwebs, on the social medias, and by the way, let's all get over to Blue Sky. Follow us on Blue Sky now. And anything other than that old website, which we're just not going to be dealing with anymore. Some people recommended this Roguebook. And it's basically the exact same concept, but with some additions that, for me, make it a lot more palatable. And apparently, there was heavy involvement from somebody you know, a guy named Richard Garfield.
When you say no, I never met the man.
No.
Yeah, Richard Garfield, PhD, is the creator of Magic the Gathering. He created the game. He created the concept of almost the concept of trading card games. He created the mana system with the 5 different colors, and each color has its strengths and weaknesses. And the mana system of having to play a land every turn, or at least one land a turn if you can. And basically, it's. If you got to choose your pieces in chess, you would just choose all queens, right? Maybe one king, because that's required for the game. Right. But if you're going to choose all queens in Magic the Gathering, you got to be able to pay the cost. And so that's one of the reasons I think it's one of the best game systems that exists in the world today. I really love Magic, and Dr. Garfield is responsible for that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the spirit of that system lives in these games. There's a similar element where mana has been replaced by energy. You've got 3 energy to spend each turn, and there's that similar balance between the more powerful, in this case usually spells or attacks or defense cards, right? Whereas in Magic it would be creatures that you summon that serve basically the same purpose here. and you have to decide, how to spend that. And then there's all kinds of different cool, fun things you can do that allow you to say, get more energy or kind of cheat the system within its own rules, right?
Right. But part of the point, or at least how it was sold to me early on, was every card you play slightly changes the rules. Now, that's not quite true,
right.
But it redefines the status quo of the field of play. And you got to start doing math. No, just, the basics of Magic is 20 plus X equals 0, right? How do I get your life total from 20 to 0? And so math gets involved very quickly.
Yeah, I think I might have said in my Slay the Spire review that I'm surprised by how much I enjoyed a game that is essentially just doing math constantly. but it's a lot of fun, and I think you could even teach certain kinds of calculations using games like this. I'm sure people do, right? So yeah, if you're familiar with those kinds of card games, then you'll be immediately familiar with Roguebook. And it even has a familiar art style, I think, to Magic the Gathering. Or I know it can really vary, but there are certain ones where I look at it and I go, yeah, this looks and feels like spiritual successors to that. But the thing that I love the most about Roguebook, being a Final Fantasy guy and that everything is Final Fantasy, is that it introduces party mechanics. So in Slay the Spire, at the beginning of each round, you pick a character, and then you build a deck around that character and do your best to get as far as you can. In Roguebook, same thing, except 2 characters and 2 decks at a time. And so you're doing twice as much deck building, and each character has their own unique set of stats. So some characters have higher hit points, higher, more natural strength, which will add to the base damage of any card, or vice versa. So essentially, it just adds a lot more different ways to manipulate the system, so that while you can still run into a lot of bad luck, I feel there's just a lot of more ways to maneuver through and figure out different ways to win, because you can swap your characters around, and there's just a lot more options available to you. And the concept of building 2 different decks at the same time, and how each of the 4 different characters play differently together, is definitely the coolest part of the game to me.
That does sound really cool. I especially when I first started out, I tended to think of my decks as characters. So my red deck had was a particular kind of aggressive person, and my green-white enchantment deck was way more defensive and kind of laid back and that sort of thing. So I like the idea of party mechanics, or being able to put together 2 decks to play together. It's almost reminiscent of a variant of or a variant format called Two-Headed Giant, where you and a partner each play your own decks, but you play at the same time.
Sure.
You run through your turn at the same time, and then your opponents run through their turn at the same time.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And so the way it works in battle is kind of like the old school Final Fantasy games. There's a front row and a back row. At any given time, one character is in front and one character is in back. Whatever character is in front at the end of the turn is the one who will take the brunt of the damage. Whatever is unblocked damage, the front character will take it. And then, of course, there are all kinds of pluses and minuses to being in either the front or the back. But the general idea being you want to... and then certain cards that will swap them. Every time a character blocks, they move to the front. And so you oftentimes end up in this situation where your character in the back has less HP, but they're the only one who has any block cards available to you. So do you use your block cards to take less damage overall, but you're still going to take some, and your character who's already hurting the most is going to be the one who takes it. And cool. I just love stuff like that.
So I got a question for you. You've mentioned a couple times now that you felt like you ran into bad luck with Slay the Spire more than you would like. I only played like 3 or 4 times. What do you mean by bad luck?
Yeah, so the way the deck building element works typically is at the beginning you're given just a handful of basic cards. And this is both in Slay the Spire and Roguebook, as you win battles or progress through parts of the stage, you will get more cards. But what cards you are given are decided at random. It's like you'll have three options, right? But those options may not be great. And most especially, they may not fit into the type of deck you've been building or you'd like to build or trying to build, right? I do think one of the options that I have been very reticent to take that might solve this problem is just not taking cards at all. I think that's a strategy that other people probably use to a better effect than I do, because I just have a hard time when given the option to add something to my deck not doing that. But sometimes it doesn't fit as well as I'd like. And, sometimes, or there are certain things like there are relics in both games, or like special items that will give certain enhancements to certain kinds of cards. But then you might not get any of those cards. So you'll have this super powerful enhancement that you earned, but then it doesn't really end up applying to your playthrough. That happens less in Roguebook, but it can still happen. And it can be kind of, especially on the harder difficulties, when you're like, I really need this one card to win. And if I don't find it in any of the vaults, they called them, because there's actually an exploration element. That's another thing I really like about Roguebook over Slay the Spire. Instead of that linear path, and you know how much I love linearity. There's a bit of a world map that's really interesting. It's like a color book. A world book from this, and apparently there's a world called Feria that I don't know if that's another game or a book or something that all of this is from. So there is probably a deeper lore out there that I'm just not aware of. But being able to wander around and discover things is nice. But yeah, that luck element can be difficult because, if you're, I don't know, in Magic the Gathering, I guess the thing is like, did you buy the card, right? You have to go out and buy enough.
Right.
So in this, it's just kind of up to total randomness.
Well, and that's... So in Magic, when we talk about luck, we're usually talking about the cards you draw. So you can get mana screwed, you can get mana flooded, your top decks can be bad.
Yeah.
But often in the Magic community, we think of that as a good thing, because it could mean that you need to build your deck better, or you need to refine your deck in some way, or maybe I've got some decks that I really only play if there's a student who has said to me, I want to play, but the kids who play are too intense. Can you show me how to do this? And I'll pull out some of my less intense decks.
Sure.
Right? So it can be this kind of deck is tuned for standard, or this one is a commander deck, or this one's two-headed giant, or this one's pauper, or whatever it might be. So there are ways to mitigate bad luck. But as far as acquiring the cards you want, now we're talking about buying actual real physical things that cost money, not an in-game currency.
Right.
And that, I think, is interesting, because you can be lucky. You can open a pack and get a really impressive card or not. Yeah. And my recommendation is if you really want to build a particular kind of deck, don't rip open packs, buy singles. So that's an interesting parallel to a digital version of that kind of a concept.
Yeah, and in fact, there is an in-game store where you can buy individual cards, but again, it's only like 3 at a time on any given run, and that's totally randomized. You just gave me an idea. I think what they could have done to make the thing at least a lot more palatable to me, a person who's played 150 hours of this game late at night while I've got a newborn, would have been just to take that store and make it so that every card in the game after a fashion is available for you to buy, but then just they've got like all kinds of penalties. Like the store is now 60% more expensive on harder difficulties, things like that. So, and the better cards can be far more expensive. So again, it's in-game currency, but it sort of simulates that same type of balance we were talking about earlier. Do you want to spend all of your money in this round on that one card you really want and then build your deck around it? Or do you want to spread it out and buy one differently? But yeah, those are just a few moments where I'm like, oh, I wish this was just a little bit different, because when I'm able to build the kind of decks that I want, I have a whole lot of fun with the game. And you can mix and match and do a lot of different interesting kinds of things. And so, yeah, it's a very, very diverse play style. The randomization is good in a lot of ways, but frustrating in just a handful.
The other thing that reminds me of is draft. So in Magic, you can draft is you get 3 packs. You open one, you pick a card, you pass to the left. The person to your right passes to you, and then you pick a new card, and you build your deck that way. And that can be randomized, or is randomized also, because you don't know what's in the pack, you don't know what's going to be passed to you, at least to begin with.
Yeah.
But the better you get at draft, and I'm no good at draft, the more you can start reading signals from what you're not seeing in what's passed to you. Oh, so somebody to my right is picking red, so I'm going to pick black. Right, and so you might, or black, blue, or whatever combination. And I got to say, I'm not that good at draft. I don't know all the strategies.
Yeah.
But that can be one of those formats where it feels like I wasn't able to draft the kind of deck I wanted, and if I had made a different decision earlier, I might have been able to draft something that I don't like as much, but would perform better.
Yes, that exact same thing. And I will say there is a plus side to it that, again, it's maybe on me for being reticent to do it, that I think it did eventually force me to just try stuff I otherwise wouldn't, and not be so attached at the beginning of my run to trying to build a certain way. And just, it really did change, so that I started playing like, well, let's see what cards I get after the first 3, 4, 5 battles, and then I'll start building around what I've got, hoping that enough other stuff comes together. And it did make me play different styles than I probably otherwise would have. So there's a plus to it, though. I'd like to be able to discover those without being forced to it through some frustration of bad luck on the other side. So yeah, I really do recommend Roguebook to anyone who likes these kinds of things and is just looking for another version of it. It may not be, the most innovative, game-changing version of it, but it's just extraordinarily pleasant. Is that okay? Like, the music is good, exploring the world is good, the hints at the deeper lore and a bit of a story are cool and interesting. The challenges, I feel like, are mostly fair. As much as I talked about the bad luck, I feel like, as much as I'm not the kind of person who likes the sort of Soulsborne, knock your head against the wall, you have to fight the boss 10 times in order to beat it, for whatever reason, in a game like this, I have a higher tolerance for that. But I just really, really enjoyed it, especially in terms of the diversity of play styles. It's something that you can play with a newborn, because there's not constant action going on. You can pause, you can wait between turns, you can leave it on the world map and go do what you need to do. It's I'm becoming a bigger and bigger fan of the kind of relaxing style games, because the only time right now that I have to play video games in the middle of the night, and I can't do a big JRPG story right now, and I can't do an action game where I've got to constantly have my hands on the controller. But something like this, and there's another game I want to tell you about next time, a farming simulator that I never thought I would be interested in. But those kind of relaxing games I'm getting more into. And this is an odd one because it can be incredibly challenging and even frustrating at times, but very satisfying. And beautiful artwork, nice music, good card game, strategy RPG, fun.
Excellent. If I find myself with a little extra cash and time, maybe I'll look into it.
Yeah.
I have a question for you that is related, but only broadly.
Okay.
We have changed the name of this enterprise to everything as Final Fantasy, and you've explained it, and for good reason. My question for you, Drew, is the biggest thing in your life right now is a baby.
Yes.
Are babies and fatherhood Final Fantasy?
Oh, yes. Oh, goodness me.
How so, sir?
Well, first of all, I mean, there are a lot I'd love to jump right into the broad thematic things of inspirational and how do you inspire hope in the next generation, and all of that is there too. But I've turned the entire act of fatherhood into a JRPG. I give myself little experience points Every time I heat up a bottle or feed the baby, I change a diaper, I level up. I get the baby to sleep. That's a big experience. That's like a boss battle right there. That's like a big, getting that baby down to sleep for more than an hour. Those are your boss battles throughout the day. There are all kinds of, you got to take those little wins, and it's a grind. Boy, is it a grind. Man, is it a grind. I will tell you what, random encounters, encounters are realer with a baby than they are anywhere else in the world. You'll just be sitting there, and out of nowhere, just wow, 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 wow. Sorry.
Well, good. You know what? I'm glad that you are having a good time. I will say, being an uncle is easy peasy.
Yeah. It seems easier, but also much like Final Fantasy, fatherhood, as difficult as it could ever be, as challenging as it could ever be, it's still the best thing. It's just the best thing.
Good.
So
good for you, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Mostly.
Uh-huh.
And we're out.